Never before have I been so offended by something I 100% agree with.
James Acaster's 4-part special repertoire is full of moments of brilliance. He has a lot of tools in his comedy tool belt. You know, he knows how to use props, how to blur fiction into his bits. He knows how to be charming.
Favourite number? Umpteen. It's a curious number, right? It sounds big, but it's in the teens. Someone's cooking the books.
He knows how to use his body. He knows how to tell good jokes with either deadpan delivery or joy or earned moments of sadness.
What if every relationship you've ever been in is just somebody slowly figuring out they didn't like you as much as they hoped they would?
But where Acaster really excels is in his moments of anger. He's an absolute joy when he's entirely wound up.
Museum gift shop rubbers are rectangular blocks of what I assume is a form of perspex. Razor sharp corners. We try and erase something with them. Don't glide across the page all nice and smooth. They pick a point on the page, pin that point down, then move that exact point back and forth. Recently, I had a police officer explain witness protection to me. You don't need to know why.
Now, the history of comedy is really rife with angry comedians. That's not new. The most common expression of anger in stand-up is typically one of a righteous anger, that kind of Lewis Black, Barry Crimmins, Bill Hicks, Bill Burr sort of energy, where they have a system that they're fighting, something that's unjust or unfair, something up above them that needs to be brought down, some great wrong that needs to be righted.
The biggest suckheads in the world are the people who think they're clever and are like, well, I happen to be politically incorrect.
Because for the last 10 years, we've seen the rise of conservatives and fundamentalists and other forms of fascist, okay? They say rock and roll's the devil's music. Well, let's say that we know for a fact rock and roll is the devil's music, and we know that it is for sure, okay? At least he fucking jams.
Anger is a really complex emotion. Frankly, it's the emotion that I find to be the most alien. When I was young, I didn't experience anger very frequently. I often just went right to sadness when I was upset. But as I get older, I'm learning how powerful and cathartic anger can be. I think if you continually choose sadness over anger every time you get upset, you're often missing opportunities to stand up for yourself. In my experience, learning how to get angry came hand in hand with learning how to fight back, how to say no. Anger meant that I respected myself enough to not accept poor treatment. Sometimes anger in stand-up can lead to clapter, which, if you're unfamiliar, is a derisive term for a phenomenon in stand-up where the audience claps rather than laughs. It's usually used to point out cheap appeals to emotions or virtue signaling as opposed to, good, funny jokes.
And let me just ask you, how many of you here hate AIDS?
And I'm not here to defend clapter by any stretch, but I think a good comedian knows how to use the whole spectrum of emotions to tell a good story. Like colors from a wide painter's palette, they help to create fuller specials or bring depth to material. And if you are skilled enough to hold an audience attention when they're not laughing, then when the laughs come back, they're going to be bigger. They're going to hit that next punchline with more oomph. It's like cooking dinner in the microwave versus cooking dinner in the oven, It's of course difficult, but in the end, it's usually worth it.
People have spoken and they've had it.
Anger can come from lots of different places. It can come from fear or insecurity. It can come from frustration, sadness.
I'm jealous of you. I'm jealous of him for believing in something that I gave up on. When you're a little Christian boy, everything's nice. It's exactly where it should be and it makes sense. When you grow up, it should get easier, but it gets harder, you get more scared and more doubtful, and then you end up just moving everything around, taking it apart and throwing a giant strop.
Now, in contrast, James Acaster's anger doesn't carry the weight that these other expressions of anger carry. His anger is usually pretty paper thin. When he performs, it often feels like he's on the verge of breaking, right? On the verge of cracking that smile. He gets himself wound up in knots over these trifles, but he sells them so ardently that we're cheering for him in all of his petty glory.
What? Is a Christian
His anger is less fire and brimstone, more temper tantrum. James Acaster isn't fighting any systems. His anger is childlike. It's impish. This is something that American comedians like John Mulaney or Maria Bamford are also very skilled at, both of whom can also feel like children in adult bodies.
I love you. I love everyone here. I wish I could find a way to show people how much I love them, despite all my words and actions.
A perspective that is often pretty fruitful for a comedian. It's something that's at once other and yet universally relatable. They know how to craft these charming little moments of hysteria. And they also know that sometimes you're laughing with them and sometimes you're laughing at them. The Telegraph once referred to James Acaster as a man on the precipice of a nervous breakdown.
Can you tell us about your flapjack, please?
Started making it, had a breakdown. Bon appetit.
Perhaps Acaster's outbursts feel especially tantrumy because he often seems like a child at play on stage. He's always having fun, especially when he's worked up. And it's charming to see someone fully commit to that sort of furiousness.
Shut up, you stupid pass tape, and suck it forever.
It's a level of pettiness that I somehow envy.
Hey James, happy Ash Wednesday. Fuck! Damn!
I feel like I kind of fully understood James Acaster's voice when I heard him tell this story of an 8-year-old who's making him furious by leaving cabbages in his bed.
The practical joke or prank?
First of all, I'll say for the record before we carry on, I hate this boy.
He's sort of parodying adult anger. He'd be great as a townsperson in a Parks and Rec episode, you know, in a tizzy about some minor inconvenience.
Couldn't get it out of my head. Days, weeks, months went by. I was still furious about it.
His clothing also plays a part when it comes to executing these tantrums and bits. He has a strange, vaguely 70s color palette and clothes that look like his mother picked them out for him. He others himself through how he dresses on stage. The voice, the clothes, he's sort of hard to peg. It seems like he's from a different time and place. He once remarked that he figured out early on that he would have better gigs when he wore jumpers. It was because I looked more like an outsider, he said, so they expected me to talk about weird stuff rather than normal stuff, referring to how the audience would be sort of mentally more receptive to something a little bit different. James Acaster's style has been called meta, absurd, surreal, a parody of stand-up. He's at times deadpan and at other times incredibly animated. He's sort of cerebral and sensitive. And he often pulls you off-center from the very opening of his show. Whether he's talking over the theater's loudspeaker or doing crowd work to the back of the room or starting the show on his knees. The entire way that James Acaster approaches stand-up has a sort of childlike innocence to it. He's not beholden to the rules that other comedians seem to be when he thinks about what he's going to do on stage. If he wants to dance around, he's gonna dance around. If he wants to stay on his knees for the first 20 minutes, he's going to do that too. If he wants to lie to you, he's gonna do that as well.
Got married to a beautiful Albanian woman. Before I did comedy, I used to own my own honey business, truth be told. My goddamn wife left me, so I was getting too obsessed with the case. Long story short, I'm about to go into witness protection. That's where I'm in my life at the minute.
Now, of course, comedians lie on stage. Of course, never let the truth get in the way of a good story. But there's usually a tacit understanding that things are rooted in truth, rooted in something real. It's quite rare to see pure fiction. It's a reminder from James that this art form is open for play. He sort of seems to be making fun of stand-up a little bit. As an example, you would never be disappointed by finding out a story that James Acaster told wasn't true.
10 years ago, I had to infiltrate a gang dealing drugs to comedians backstage at comedy gigs. Naturally, I assumed the identity of a stand-up comedian to get close to the gang. 10 years down the line, still haven't closed the case, but the gigs keep rolling in. Good to be here.
He never asks you to believe him. He just wants you to come along for the ride. Where, by contrast, if I found out that John Mulaney's story about the Salt and Pepper Diner was a complete fabrication, I would feel cheated. That's not the case with Acaster. He's more in the vein of Steve Martin. He's not othering himself enough to have a unique name or be a character. It's an integrated otherness. He knows it's a game, the audience knows it's a game, and we can enjoy it together. He's not beholden to anything, to any idea of what a joke is, of what anger has to look like, of what stand-up has to look like, or what a bit is supposed to look and sound like. I'm always pushing for more fun in comedy. I can be a little burned out on righteous anger sometimes, and perhaps that has to do with my own personal relationship with anger, which is why it's fun to see someone have as much fun as James Acaster does. I love to see him lie, I love to see him get angry and throw temper tantrums, and I cannot wait to see what he does next.
I guess I'll either stay here until one of two things happens. Either I get the Spice Girls' debut album Spice, or I'm gonna die.
Okay, there you have it. I've been meaning to talk about Acaster forever. People have suggested him since I started, and I'm really excited to have finally touched on him. Also, while doing research, I came across another video essay that just came out about Acaster made by Comedy Without Errors. I'll link that one down below. Go and check it out. It's pretty rad. And thanks to my friend Lewis for helping me with this video. Hope you guys are doing well. Suggest what you want to see next, and subscribe. We're getting close to 3K, which makes me very happy. Hope you're well. Bye!